Welcome all. We have a portion called Ki Tavo, which is always read on the penultimate Shabbos of the year. And there's a reason for that, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. And a lot of this parasha deals with what I entitled as sheer blessings and curses, with regrettably, sadly, the bulk of the parasha actually listing curses, and we need to try maybe and understand what that's about. So we'll begin with the brocha. Begin with the brocha. If you listen to the voice of Hashem, you fulfill the commandments that I command you, I will set you high above other nations in the world, and all the blessings will reach you. They'll take effect, and that's if you listen to the voice of Hashem. Yes, and then the parasha carries on with a long list of brachas, of blessings, blessed in the city, blessed in the country, blessed be the issue of the womb, the produce of the soil, offspring of your cattle, calving of your herd, lambing of your flock, and that's just the first two. There's a long list of blessings, of brachas. But then, the next paragraph takes a turn. But if you don't obey Hashem to observe faithful with commandments, it's almost the mirror reverse, which I enjoin you on this day. All these curses shall come upon you and take effect. And then it's the corollary. You're blessed in the city and in the country, your basket and your kneading bowl, the issue of your womb, your produce from the soil, the calving of your herd, lambing of your flock. So it's actually the reverse. And the portion of the curses for lack of observance stretches much further than the brachas. It takes up, we list 98 curses in the parasha. So this portion of curses, klalot, or we prefer to call it tochacha or rebuke, it features twice in the Torah, also in the portion of Bechukotai. And what these two portions have in common is that they fall just before a major chag, major festival. So, as I said, Ki Tavo, this week's parasha, falls just before Rosh Hashanah, or 1 week away, and then Bechukotai falls right before Shavuot. And in fact, the entire cycle of the Torah readings, how you decide which portion to read when, which portions must be combined, etc. It's based on these rules. There has to be a certain portion read before Tisha B'Av, there has to be a certain portion read before Shavuot, and a certain portion read before Rosh Hashanah, and the rest of the cycle will get a kind of catch up and or slow down to whether it's a leap year or it's a shorter year to make that pattern work. Now, why is it so important to have these so-called portions of curses before those two milestone chagim? So one's the Day of Judgment, which is coming up in 2 weeks' time, and on the Shabbos just before we read this, and it's sobering. It's an awakening. It's the right way to go into Rosh Hashanah. Understanding the importance of the judgment. And the repercussions, one way or the other. Shavuot, when we enter the covenant with Hashem, we relive that. And again, so it's kind of a cleansing, a spiritual catharsis of purifying ourselves. But this is kind of almost like a purification by fire, where it's very harsh stuff that really affects our psyche in a deep way. By realizing the things that not only were predicted would happen, but in fact, with the hindsight of history, you can look through these portions and you can see history going from destruction of the Second Temple and the Roman exile, previously the Babylonian exile, going all the way to 80 years ago and all the way to 1 year ago. and it's frightening. So to prepare for these Chagim, there is this kind of cleansing, purification, but it's a bit harsh to go straight from such a difficult portion into Yontif. So there's always a Shabbos in between. So the portion Nitzavim, or in some years in some Vayelech HaKobain, that's going to be the week after next. And in the case of Shavuot, it's usually Bamidbar, sometimes it's even Bamidbar and Naso, following B'chukotai. But in our case, current juncture in the calendar, there is another reason given in the Gemara for why we want to do this now. And that is what the Gemara says is Tichle Shana Uklaloteha. That means, may the year and its curses end, Tachel Shana Ubirchoteha, and may the new year and its blessings, begin. And this is a greeting and a wish that I think in the current year we're going to be using quite a bit as we head to a new year. We're going to say, we suffered enough tzaros, be it in Israel, be it around the world, with what's been going on since right after the Yontif season, just even before it ended. And let's kind of go into a new year with blessings. So the Gemara in Megillah actually says that this is the reason why we read these portions, the portion of Kitavo before Rosh Hashanah, to say, look, let's kind of get the curses out of the way, or maybe my mother says, "Jetzt mit Schreck." In Yiddish, just let's get away with just having had the fright. We don't actually have to have the threat. So it's whatever bad has to happen, let it kind of be purged through reading this and thinking about it and talking about it without actually manifesting. So that's a reason, says the Gemara, why we're going to read this. This is obviously a greeting card of sorts that I found somewhere online. People are very frightened of these words in the Torah. In fact, there was a custom years ago in some communities not to read the Torah on those two Shabbosim. It's a parsha of the week. You can't skip and move to next week's parsha. That's the parsha of the week. But on those weeks, they just skipped Torah reading. The Torah remained in the Ark. Those who wanted to study it privately did so. But in terms of a public reading of those curses, it was, and the rabbis at the time, we were talking several generations back, they kind of decried this as a ridiculous custom. And the words of Torah are holy, and the merit of the Torah itself protects, and no harm can come from it. So none of us go as far in our communities as omitting Torah reading altogether. But who we're going to call up to the Torah becomes a little bit of a controversy, because clearly, who wants to be called up to the Torah and stand next to a Baal Korah who says, God will strike you with this and with that and with that? So people prefer to be far from the bima as this is happening. Yeah, you're following your city, you listen. What do we do? In most communities, the Baal Korah goes up. We don't call anybody at all. Baal Korah, who's standing on the bima, just goes up. He's there. He makes the brachas afterwards. Nobody calls him by name, and we move on. But there are other customs that I'm going to come back to. One of the rules about reading a Tochacha is that you have to read it from beginning to end without pause. In other words, you can't cut it up into aliyot. So that makes, for example, this week's parasha very lopsided, whereas the first 5 aliyot are kind of short, and they get to shishi, which is very long. That's because the entire totality of the klalot of the Tochacha must be read as one. One of the reasons given is because if you stop in the middle, it's as if you can't handle it, you can't take it anymore. And of course, it's Torah, it's blessing. Now you got to remember that the system we have in shul today, that we have a Baal Korah and then the person that gets called up for an aliyah, that's for sissies. The real way it's supposed to be is that each person comes up and reads their own aliyah. On occasion, I've reverted to that custom in my shul when I've had the misfortune of having hired a Balkara who is very lousy. So then I've kind of said, I'm taking the next aliyah, and I have the custom to lay myself. So would you mind stepping aside just for this aliyah? Then sometimes I develop the custom of finishing the parsha as well, but it's not good enough. But that's not the practice. The practice is that nowadays we hire Balkara, and we don't encourage people to lay in their own aliyot, because that's going to show the other people up. So if Shlishi and Ravi and Chamishi are able to read their own aliyot, and then Shvi comes up and says, "I need someone to help," it's awkward. It's embarrassing. So we just have a Balkara that's fixed in order not to embarrass anybody. So the practice is slightly different for that reason. So in the olden days, as the practice was that each person read their own aliyah, if a person is going to kind of stop halfway and then do the end brachot and go off the bimah, it's going to appear as if, he says, this is enough for me, I can't handle it anymore, we're going to stop. And that would be the wrong message. There's a rule that you read the entire section as one portion with one person actually reading it. And that is also because it's not appropriate to make a bracha on a curse, on something negative. So what we do is we kind of add a couple of verses before, we add a couple of verses after that don't deal with anything negative. So that's where the bracha is made before and after, not just on klalot, not just on curses, but also on other verses. It's kind of added on either side with something positive. As a rule, when we do Torah readings, we don't stop or begin with something of negative. So if you look, sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive. Long portion and you go another paragraph and then you stop 3 verses into the next paragraph. Why not cut where it's neat and it's a different topic and heading? And simply because if that paragraph ends with something negative, sometimes is Heshashur Yadayim or Yumat or something like Ra or Rasha or anything that has a negative connotation. We don't want to end Aliyah with that, and then the person stands up and makes a bracha on something negative. So this is why we read the entire Tochacha as one, for one person. It's also customary in some shuls to read it slightly softer. Not so soft that the congregation cannot hear, but just to lower the voice somewhat in order to just show that this is something that you want to diminish somewhat. There's also a custom to read it somewhat faster than the rest of the Torah reading, but there, caution. There's some very hard words, so only a very good Balkara should actually take on that practice of reading faster, or he's not going to make himself the darling of the congregation if he does that. Read the beginning and the end of the Pasha slower than his normal pace, and then speed it up to his regular pace when it comes to Shishi. So that those are customs, but if you engage in either of those customs in the shul, it must be with the proviso that it's not so fast or so soft that the congregation cannot follow. So as I said, the custom has developed, I think virtually in all shuls nowadays, that the Balkar who is standing and reading the Torah anyway comes Shishi, or in the case of B'chukotai would be Shlishi, he just makes the brachas. We don't call him by name. He just gets up, makes the brachas, does the end brachas, and then we move on to the last aliyah, Shvi'i. But there are lots of different customs regarding who should be called or not be called. So at Oxford on Shabbos, we're going to deviate somewhat from the fixed custom of the Balkara. Now, I'm generally one for sticking to protocols, and I wouldn't break the rule, but I've got an issue. My Balkar at the moment, who is outstanding, I let him learn from my own Aliyah every Shabbos, well, whenever I get called up, is a Levi. Now, Levi can only be called up for a second Aliyah, or if there's no Kohen present for the first Aliyah. So he cannot be called up, even if you don't call him by name. That's not the practice. So we're gonna have to ask somebody else to come up and make the brachas. And generally, it's somebody who's already standing on the bimah that'll come up and do that at that point. There are communities where it's actually somebody who is honored with this in a positive way. Now, why would somebody be honored with this? It dates back to the holy Ari, the Arizal, who used to insist that he would get that aliyah and he would learn it himself, and he would learn it in the normal pace and the normal tone, the normal volume. And why is that? Because he wanted not just to show that it's Torah and it's not frightening and it's an honor to be called up for any aliyah, but because Kabbalah teaches us, and he was the father of applied Kabbalah and of bringing it into the world and teaching it. Kabbalah teaches that nothing bad comes from heaven. Therefore, even curses as they are written in the Torah, they're blessings. So it's our perception, it's our problem that we see them for face value. But if you appreciate the deeper significance of those things that appear to us to be blessings, then they're not really blessings. Sorry, those things that appear to us, to be curses, then at their core, they're actually blessings. Now, the Ari was aware of this, and this is why he insisted on reading it himself, and that's where the custom existed in some shuls that you call it a dignitary of the Rav or whatever it was to read that aliyah. And this takes us to a classic story. It's recorded in Hayom Yom, which is a kind of a book of aphorisms for each day of the year. It was composed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but before he was Rebbe, it was still in his father-in-law's lifetime, and it's got like a little statement for each day of the week, and this is dated 17 Elul, which is Friday's date, and that year, which was 1943, when this was first published, and it was actually a Friday, so this is Erev Shabbos of the portion of this week, and the story is that the Alter Rebbe, that's the Pshnei Zalman of Liadi, he was the Balkar in the shul, and he was away for this portion of Tavo, or Kitavo. His son is the Mittler Rebbe, Dovbe. His son, who was a youngster, heard the Torah reading from another, and he became very anguished at the curses, and it caused him so much heartache that the Alter Rebbe wasn't sure whether he'd be allowed to fast on Yom Kippur, because it like literally affected his health to hear such words from the Torah. But here's a punchline. So they asked him, well, that happened last year and the year before, and this was his answer: when Father reads, one hears no curses. If you have a Balkar of the caliber of the Balatani, you're not hearing curses. You can hear the deeper meaning because he's able to render that. Now, maybe you have to be a Rebbe's son to be able to hear that. But between them, it's kind of, he was reading it and the son was listening to it, and the curses didn't really feature because both of them were kind of going straight. This was a youngster, 11, 12, whatever it was, who could capture the core of what was being said rather than the form, rather than the box in which those concepts would contain the words that framed them. Apparently, I'm not quite sure what the principle is, but according to Kabbalah, you can give greater blessings when they're given in the form of curses. So I'll have to read up on that. One day, there's a story in the Gemara about a father who sends his son to visit some dignitaries, some rabbanim in a different town, When he comes back, his father says, "What happened?" He says, "No, they cursed me. They said this, they said that, they said that." And the Gemara explains how each of these curses were actually disguised blessings. I'm not going to go there now, but it's a very interesting study in how the words that you say don't necessarily convey exactly the meaning of the literal meaning of the words. So that's a custom that exists where the dignitary or an important person in the community goes up for the aliyah. As I said, that's based on the practice of the Ari. There was a custom in some communities that when an announcement came to Shishi, Gabbai banged on the bimah and said, "If anybody wishes to come up for this aliyah, please come forward." And sometimes there were people who came up, understood the preciousness, the specialness, these words of the Torah, and they wanted to be called up and receive brachas in the form of the opposite thereof. And in those communities, the deal was that if nobody came up voluntarily, then the shamus of the shul would come up. Now, why does he deserve this? So this was part of the contract, standard pro forma contract. That was, you bought its importance. It's a shamus employment contract, and it says, in the event that nobody will come up voluntarily for the curses of Chukotay and Kitavo, the shamus is, part of his duties to come up. And once he's contracted to do that, then there's no implication, nothing is being imputed by him coming up. Whereas if we, ask somebody in the community, please come up, that would be awkward in terms of kind of singling somebody out for this. Which incidentally, and I don't think this practice exists anymore, but there were communities in which they picked a person to be called up for this. There was somebody in the community who wasn't behaving in a manner that is appropriate, and they felt that he deserved that rebuke, and that individual was called up by name for an aliyah. But that practice is unheard of. In those days, if somebody acted incorrectly in their personal lifestyle, and the violation they were guilty of was one listed in the parsha. So if somebody was particularly dishonest, for example, with weights and measures. So we had this in Shavi'i of last week, which says you may not have, 2 weights or 2 measuring cups, etc. So if this guy was known to cheat in his grocery store by having, 1 weight for selling and 1 weight for buying, then they would call him up for that aliyah. That was a practice that also existed when there were certain, people who had immoral lifestyles, etc. That is not done, anymore. There are no anyway. Or at least it's definitely not recommended. Came across a very interesting response. So, letter written to a great Lachid Sizer, describing a situation that happened in the shul. What happened in the shul was that a visitor came in. He was a wealthy businessman, and they wanted to honor him with an aliyah. So the Gabbai called him up. He says, Yamod, Ruvain, Ben Yehuda, Shishi. And suddenly there was a hush in the community, everyone staring, and suddenly the Gabbai says, "Oh my gosh, I've called up this important visitor from out of town for the parsha of the curses." And so he said to the gentleman, "Step aside and stand aside of the bimah, the Balker will read it without being called up, and then you'll have Shavi." Fortunately, it wasn't the last aliyah, there was still 1 more to go. Now, the response was sent to a big rabbi to ask if this was correct, based on the rule that is brought down that if you given an aliyah and you refuse it and don't go up to the bimah, it has some very harsh, serious consequences. So they asked if they acted correctly, and I forget who the rabbi was that they had consulted, actually responded that they'd done the absolute correct thing by making the person stand aside until, step aside. That one of the rules in South African politics, the step aside rule. Well, here they actually applied it. And he got the next aliyah of Shavi. Interestingly, and I'd like to end with this, the curses in our parsha are double the number that they are in Bechukotai. 49, 98. Furthermore, they appear to be far harsher, for a simple reason that they're in the singular. So it's not a general you plural, which is, the curse will befall the people. But when you hear it being said in the singular you, as in thou, the individual, it kind of cuts much deeper. And the reason for that may be, it's suggested, because the curses in our week parsha are actually just after they've entered the land of Israel. It's Moshe talking to them just before they're going to come in, and there will be a ceremony on Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim a few weeks later, where they would actually do this and pronounce, those blessings and curses. And because it's right before their actual entry into Israel, when they have to observe the mitzvot that they've been given, and we're told that, lack of observance, lack of respect for a land and its laws, that's going to result in those negative consequences. So it's more verbose, and it's more direct as they're about to enter the land of Israel. But there's something very interesting. In virtually every verse of this week's parasha's curses, there's God's name. And that's something almost comforting, because when bad things happen, take 2024, 2023, 2024, when bad things happen, you kind of are thinking, where's Hashem in all this? Is it all happening and God kind of, gone for a shlof and letting things happen by itself? Says the garden of Israel doesn't slumber, doesn't sleep, but sometimes we need an awakening. And when we read in the Torah that even when the worst things happen, Hashem is there, and for whatever reason it's happening, we don't understand it, we don't know, and that's, as I said before, there's nothing bad that comes from above, and therefore if it comes from Hashem, it's a blessing. The fact that it says in each verse Yitain Hashem and Yaseh Hashem and so forth, and that mentions God every step of the way, is supposed to be a form of a comfort to us as well, that even though we've had a tortured history, literally, there was never any time that Hashem had abandoned his people. Thank you.